Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support the Benjamin Dixon.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Hey, welcome, folks. Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, March 27th, 2017. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all of our patrons. Thanks to everyone who makes the show possible. We have a wonderful, wonderful bonus show for you after the show tonight. It's all good, Max. It's all good. Better now than at the end of April, right? So we have a great bonus show for you tonight. And I think everyone should become a patron so that you can go see the bonus show. Shameless plug. But no, tonight we talked about a story that I'm writing, and a science fiction short story that I'm writing that has a lot of political implications. So to all the patrons who have become patrons, it's a great time to be a patron for the Benjamin Dixon Show. Those of you who are not quite yet patrons, go, pledge $3, buy me a drink. That's not even a drink. I think that's like a bottle of water. Buy me a bottle of water on a monthly basis, blah, 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 all that good stuff. I've just, it's a busy day. Busy, hectic day, and we're going to jump right into the news. I'm not even sure what's first on my list. There's so much happening in the news. I want to start with some lighter stories. I am going to cover the disappearance of so many black teens, just women in general in D.C. We're going to cover that, but it's a heavy story, so we're going to work our way into it. But let's start with some news on Donald Trump. More specifically, I want to start with Jeff Sessions. So Jeff Sessions today made it clear that he is going to, actually, let's let him speak for himself in regards to sanctuary cities. Listen in.
The president has rightly said disregard for law must end. In his executive order, he stated that it is the policy of the executive branch to ensure that states and cities comply with all federal laws, including all immigration laws.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I'm urging states and local jurisdictions to comply with these federal laws, including 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. Moreover, the Department of Justice will require that jurisdictions seeking or applying for Department of Justice grants to certify compliance with 1373 as a condition of receiving those awards.
All right. So too long, didn't read or didn't listen. Essentially, he's going to withhold funding, grants from the Department of Justice from cities that do not essentially renounce being sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are cities that have either directly or tacitly agreed not to use their local law enforcement to do the job of ICE agents, immigration and customs enforcement. So in other words, if you get pulled over, they're not going to ask you for your papers, please. And so Donald Trump is looking to end that because he's cast this narrative that that sanctuary cities are somehow more dangerous and it's more threatening. And so therefore, these cities are unsafe. And this is his way of forcing the cities to become compliant as well as safer cities. We see that the evidence does not, as with almost everything else with Donald Trump, the evidence does not support his claims. Sanctuary cities are no more dangerous than any other city. But this is his contention, very similarly to the contention of Jeff Sessions, who has a personal obsession with marijuana. He insists that marijuana is just a little bit less dangerous than heroin. There's clearly evidence to suggest the complete opposite of that claim. But this is a trend with the Trump administration. They make an absurd claim, and then they use the force of the federal government to enforce that claim, to crack down on that claim. And he's doing this with the ICE. And so there's about $4.1 billion in federal grants that will be withheld from cities that that are sanctuary cities. There's a city here in Boston, Somerville, Massachusetts. Boston itself is a sanctuary city, but Somerville has let it be known that they are going to still remain a sanctuary city. Now, what type of impact does this have? I've seen some graphs, some data that suggests that this federal funding represents less than 1% of the respective city's budget. However, it is a clear affront to sanctuary cities. And, you know, anyone who claims to be on the side of states' rights, which conservatives so often use that as an excuse for the federal government not to get involved. You should see clearly the hypocrisy of the federal government getting involved in this draconian fashion in order to tread upon the rights of individual states, local municipalities. But again, this is in the purview. This is clearly something that the federal government can do. This is something that the Department of Justice can do. It is something similar to what President Obama put in writing, but not so much in enforcement. There's a couple of articles floating around that suggest that President Obama did the same exact thing. That's not the case. President Obama did make these statements. President Obama did make it a quote unquote policy, but the enforcement thereof has been left now to the Trump administration to actually enforce this Department of Justice stranglehold on these local cities who want to remain. And it's not so much that they are a sanctuary city where they're inviting you in and you're going to be safe here. They're simply saying we're not going to use local resources to do the job of the federal government when the federal government is not giving any funding to actually enhance or to support this mandate. So there's another level of states' rights that are being violated because this is a mandate that is not being enforced, or I'm sorry, an unfunded mandate. That's the hilarity of this. So anyone who's following this, you should be able to clearly see, that this is an infringement on local rights. This is hypocritical, right? This should not be a surprise. The New York Times has reported on a number of studies which, one quote from the New York Times, have concluded that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than people born in the United States. I definitely can believe that. According to the New York Times, experts say that the available evidence does not support the idea that undocumented immigrants commit a disproportionate share of crime. But what they do consistently, and we saw this at his first joint session of Congress speech, he uses anecdotal evidence. He uses individual cases that do not suggest a trend, that don't have enough data points to even have probably a robust analysis in the first place. But he takes these stories of individual examples of someone being killed by an immigrant, and he makes federal policy to crack down on a problem that does not exist. If you want to crack down on illegal immigration, that's one thing, but to crack down on a, quote, disproportionate amount of crime being committed in sanctuary cities, that does not exist by the data. But that's completely irrelevant because we're dealing with an administration that's antithetical, that simply rejects the idea of truth and facts. So Jeff Sessions, he also said this in his hearing, in his session today. He said that the policies of sanctuary cities simply cannot continue. He said countless Americans would be alive today and countless loved ones would not be grieving today if the policies of the sanctuary's jurisdictions were ended. What is countless, right? We literally can count the number of people who have been killed by immigrants in or illegal immigrants, for that matter, in sanctuary cities. We literally can count them. So this weasel language is being used for them to enact draconian policies on every angle, right? So this policy of withholding funds, that in and of itself is not draconian in the sense that it has pre-existed the Trump administration, but it's just one element out of all the tools that Donald Trump is using to crack down on illegal immigration in general. countless families. It blows my mind that this type of weaselly language is permitted and allowed when in fact we can actually count the number of people who have been killed by illegal immigrants in sanctuary cities. So it's a problem. It's a problem that they're using. It's an anecdote that they're using. Yes, there are examples of individuals being killed, right? But to create a policy on a trend that doesn't exist and to utilize language to suggest that this trend does exist when in actuality it does not exist. And the data reflects, according to the New York Times, who was citing several studies, it suggests that they are not as violent as American citizens. But we're not going to do anything about American citizens. We're not going to do anything about this white supremacist who drove up from Maryland to New York City to kill black people and ended up killing a 66-year-old black man, stabbing him in the back with a 26-inch mini sword, right? We're not going to do anything about that, which is a clear and present threat, right? The white terrorism that exists in the United States. Matter of fact, we won't even answer questions about it. When Jeff Sessions was asked by a White House correspondent about this is what he did.
Thank you all.
What about the Eric Garner case and the white supremacist that killed the black man in New York? Is that a hate crime, sir?
Okay, you guys ready to continue?
There you go. So you have this reporter who's asking him about the Department of Justice and their role in hate crimes, right? So we're focusing on the countless lives that have been lost in sanctuary cities, which in actuality we can count. And then he ignores the question about what about the real crimes that actually occur on an ongoing basis. Eric Garner, that's inside of the Department of Justice's purview. The man who went from Maryland to New York City specifically to kill black people. They won't even address the question. So this is what's happening with and here's the last thing I'll say about Jeff Sessions. Why the hell does he have a job? Why is he still the attorney general? When if you or I had lied in front of Congress the way he did, the exact same way he did, one of us, we would be charged with perjury. We would be on trial for perjury, but not Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions continues to serve as the attorney general, floating evidence that's not really evidence, suggesting a trend that does not exist, and bringing draconian policies to crack down on a problem that really is not the core problem that he should be addressing, or a problem that even exists in the manner that he suggests. All right, 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. So speaking of the question that Jeff Sessions ignored, so as he was leaving out, he was asked a question by the White House correspondent. He ignored that question, kept going. So Sean Spicer actually had to be the one to answer the question, addressing the increase in hate crimes, the uptick in anti-Semitism that has occurred during the President Trump's time. Just 65 days in, give or take a day. So let's listen to Sean Spicer's response to the question about white supremacy in the United States.
While we unequivocally, no question about it, need to call out hate, anti-Semitism where it exists, there is another thing that we have to do. And in your case in particular, while I don't know all of the details and I don't want to reference any specific case, but I think we saw this the other day with some of the anti-Semitic behavior that was going out with respect to people of the Jewish faith, is that we saw these threats coming into Jewish community centers, and there was an immediate jump to criticize folks on the right and to denounce people on the right and ask them to condemn them. And it turns out that, in fact, it wasn't someone on the right. And it was the president from the get-go had said, I bet you it's not someone, and he was right. And yet, oh no, I understand that. And that's
saying he's a white supremacist.
I understand that, and I think in those cases, there's no question, black and white, we need to call out all instances of this. But that being said, while we're on the topic, I do think that there has been a
White
a
supremacy.
rush to judgment in a lot of other cases when it comes to, in particular, some of the anti-Semitic discussion, where people have jumped to the conclusion about denouncing people on the right and asking for this. And in that particular case, we saw that the president was right and that this rush to judgment by a lot of folks on the left was wrong, and none of them have been held to account on that. And that is something that equally needs to be called out. When people are charging something of someone...
cut them. So anyway, so this is what Sean Spicer does. This is what a press secretary does. This is not Jermaine. This is not just Republican press secretaries. This is what press secretaries do. However, if you're going to use a red herring, Sean, if you're going to use a red herring, at least use a red herring that proves your point. So this is what he did. When faced with a question about the uptick in white supremacy, he deflects and goes to the question of anti-Semitism. The reason he does that is because there is one specific example. Since January 1st through March, there has been a significant uptick in the number of anti-Semitic threats and hate crimes. He went there because there's an example of someone on the left, Juan Thompson, I think. He used to work for The Intercept. The Intercept fired him years ago because he turned out to be, I don't know why they fired him, but it turns out the dude is crazy. I hate ableist language. Turns out that he was not the type of human being that you want working for you. So Sean Spicer goes there because he can use that as a way of generalizing the conversation to make it all a wash and say, well, this is just something that everybody does. And look, this is somebody on the left who did these hate crimes against the Jewish community centers. If you're going to use a red herring, Sean, use one that supports your argument, because there has been 90 confirmed cases of bomb threats against Jewish community centers since January 1st. Juan Thompson, if I have his name correct, he's guilty of 9 of those. 9 out of 90. The rest of them have either not been solved, or they have been people on the right. So 10% of all of the anti-Semitic threats that have taken place since January 1st were caused by a person on the left. Congratulations. You proved your point. Not really. 90% of what's left represents a true uptick in hate crimes and anti-Semitism in the United States. So your entire red herring does not support your argument in the first place. But now let's go back to the original argument, because the original argument is not about anti-Semitism. The original argument is the president going to address the uptick in white supremacy in the United States? And I love what he does there. He says, whenever we have this, we have to address black and white. I'm not aware, except for Clayton Bigsby from Dave Chappelle, of black white supremacists. Right? So I mean, this is ridiculous. This is lazy. This is a lazy retort, and it's a lazy deflection that hopefully everyone can see directly through what he's trying to do. But for those who can't, he is genuflecting as much as he can. He's deflecting, rather, as much as he can to not address the fact that President Trump has not a single time, not once, addressed the uptick in white supremacy and white violence and white terrorism that has taken place at the hands of people who are Trump supporters. The mosque massacre in Toronto, I believe, 6 Muslims killed by a white supporter, a white conservative supporter of Trump. Didn't say anything about it. You have the examples from Texas and across the country where you have 2 different cases where supporters of Donald Trump were involved in hate crimes. Some have been killed. Some of the people they committed these crimes against were killed, and they used the specific language of "get out of my country." Donald Trump, silent. And now you have this man who went to New York and killed 66-year-old Timothy Kaufman, who wanted to kill black people, and he was upset because he didn't kill a young thug. And Donald Trump is still silent. Now, here's the other problem with Sean Spicer's argument, as well as most conservatives. They try to suggest that this is somehow that this is not really, we shouldn't really look at this in terms of blaming the right, because if we blame the right, then we're jumping to conclusions, and we're not being fair to the right, because we're trying to make the right be responsible for all of the hate crimes that take place underneath the banner of conservatism. And that's just not fair. How do you think black people, we'll get to black people in a second. How do you think Muslims feel whenever something happens in the United States? We know for a fact, if they do not mention the race of the person, then chances are it wasn't a Muslim, because if they had, or they weren't from Arab descent, because if they had been Arab descent, or have they been Muslim or Middle Eastern, or if they had a Middle Eastern sounding name, then the news would run headlong with it, terrorism in the United States. This is exactly what the right does every single opportunity that they get. So you cannot cry foul for something that you are 100% guilty of. And not just this anonymous they. This is something that Donald Trump himself is specifically guilty of, making the Muslim community held accountable for the individual actions of one person, even before they know whether or not he was Muslim in the first place. So on all counts, Sean Spicer failed, on top of the fact that he has something, I don't know what the hell that was, spinach stuck in his teeth. On all counts, he's failed. And the problem is that we can see this clearly. But for conservatives, they feel like this is a great example of Sean doing a great job. That's how we know we live in two different worlds. All right, folks, 857-600-0518. If you want to join the conversation, we're going to push through and cover a couple of the news. A lot of stories that are happening that we have to talk about. Let's jump. If we don't have any callers yet, we will jump to. And actually, did we set the phones up correctly? Maybe we didn't. Well, we'll worry about that later. We'll see if we got the lines open. Let's talk about the Russian protest. International news. So over the weekend, Russian opposition groups launched protests over Russia to protest state corruption. And I want to put an emphasis on state corruption because that's significant in the narrative, and we'll talk about that in momentarily. So they had an estimate between 7,000 and 30,000 people who demonstrated in Moscow, and up to 10,000 in St. Petersburg. And they had rallies in about 82 cities in total. 700 people were arrested in Moscow, 34 in St. Petersburg, and between 80 and 100 in other cities, according to ABC News. These are the biggest protests that the country has seen since 2011. Of course, Vladimir Putin condemned them, saying that they are American-backed. So America has some really serious influence there. We can get about 30, 40,000 people to protest on our behalf, but I digress. He's also claiming that they have been, they're paid protesters. In a lot of ways, he's mobilizing the language of Donald Trump, suggesting that they're fake protesters, suggesting that they're just, paid, not just paid, but that they're backed by another country, that they're not loyal, they're not, So this is kind of the language that Donald Trump uses to minimize the effectiveness of the protests that we see here in the United States. But according to ABC News, the protests were catalyzed by a report by the opposition, which alleged that the Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, had embezzled millions away from the Russian taxpayer in order to fund a lavish lifestyle. The Kremlin, of course, dismisses the allegations, but this seems to be the impetus behind the protest. This actually gives the protesters some room to not have the level of crackdown that you could expect to come from the Russian government as of yet, right? One, because they're not expressly asking for political change. They're not asking for the Putin regime to be replaced. They're not asking for really much except for a less corrupt government. Now, Putin has already come out against it, but it's really interesting that I really believe the crackdown would be much more severe if they were asking for the Putin regime to step down. All they're asking for is a less corrupt government. What's concerning is that if these protests evolve, then you will see a massive crackdown. I mean, I believe, and I was listening to NPR, no, it was some station here locally. I'm trying to think. It was Boston Public Radio, actually. It's a part of the NPR family. But they were discussing the laws there, which have been loosened with regard to protests, because now you can be arrested simply for attending the protest, right? So it's not just the draconian laws that they already have on the books, which means organizers could be arrested, leaders could be arrested, but now just people who attend in the first place can be arrested. So there's a lot of room there for these 30, 40,000 people to actually be arrested and serve a significant amount of time, because it is not necessarily legal for them to protest in this manner. Out of 30, 40,000 people, 700 people arrested, that's a lot of people. I really feel like it would be a lot more if they were calling for express regime change. So this will be interesting to see how this plays out, how Russia, particularly Vladimir Putin, responds to this in the long run. Right now, we see the standard play from the government suggesting that these are people who have been paid and that they have been influenced by the United States. Our State Department got in, the acting spokesperson for the State Department, Mark Toner, he said, quote, "Detaining peaceful protesters, human rights observers, and journalists is an affront to core democratic values. We call on the government of Russia to immediately release all the peaceful protesters. The Russian people, like people everywhere, deserve a government that blah, blah, blah." You get it. You get the language. I want to see where this goes from here. Will the protests be sustained, and will they change what they're demanding from a less corrupt government, which in actuality, that should be something easily delivered on, even if it's token, right? They can give they can pass legislation that are really nothing more than platitudes to address corruption and kind of pacify the crowds, possibly, potentially. But if this evolves into asking for regime change, for the Putin government to step down, then I'm sure the percentages of people who are arrested will skyrocket in Russia. All right, let's take this first caller. Caller, you're live on the air. We have our phones working now. What is your name, comment, and our question?
Hey, man, it's Bryce.
Hey, Bryce, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Doing good. So, obviously, the medical care situation, healthcare situation, obviously they had failed, and I don't know what do you think they're going to try next in terms of this healthcare thing, because it failed, and it's like, what can they do? Because now, now they're back on each other, and Paul Ryan is probably going to be the fall guy. So,
definitely.
What do you think is next on the healthcare level of things?
Great question. Let's talk about that. Actually, that's the next thing on my list to talk about. So we saw the spectacular destruction of the Republican health care bill over the weekend. Actually, on Friday, they had to pull the legislation because they did not have enough votes. The House Freedom Caucus, they were 100% not going to support this legislation, not because they thought the legislation was bad. They didn't believe the legislation was bad enough. Paul Ryan wanted to only kill so many million. The House Freedom Caucus, they really wanted to gut Medicare and Medicaid. They want to really get rid of entitlements across the board. Paul Ryan knew that was not politically tenable right now, and so he did as much as he could. He did as much. He went as far as he could to hurt as many people as he possibly could and get away with it. At least he thought. It was not good enough for the House Freedom Caucus, and because of that, they as a bloc voted against it, or at least expressed that they were going to vote against it. One report that I keep seeing coming from thehill.com is that this became so intense that Paul Ryan got on his knees and begged, literally got on his knees and begged for the votes to make this happen. and yet he did not get enough. Since then, the blame game has been going on. Donald Trump placed all of his political capital on it, and so this is an embarrassment for Donald Trump. This is an embarrassment for Paul Ryan. Fox News has targeted Paul Ryan as the person who is responsible. I believe her name is Shapiro, or Judge Shapiro. Donald Trump tweeted out that everyone should watch this segment from Shapiro. And in this segment, she says that Paul Ryan should step down. Now, that means something. And we talked about the power of the president's words, because now the Paul Ryan team, they've come out and really let President Trump know that this is a problem. This is not something that can fly. So you have dissension in the ranks, you have division in the ranks, and you have President Trump, who really does not have the political patience. I don't think he has the political acumen in general, but he definitely does not have the political patience to weather the storm, because not only did he attack Paul Ryan, he attacked the House Freedom Caucus, and he attacked them on abortion and in the right to life, et cetera, et cetera. He is undermining his ability to get anything done in the future. And the question is, what's their next move? Are they going to go to tax reform, giving tax cuts to the wealthiest? Possibly, but how effective will Donald Trump be when he has alienated so many members of his own party? I love it. Continue to do it. Keep doing what you're doing, Donald Trump, because it's great for America. It's great that you are a thorn in the side of your own party and they don't have the ability to find solidarity with you. Please keep doing that, because it's in the best interest of Americans, because your agenda is to hurt so many Americans. One last thing on this before we take this next caller. The real question is, where are they going to go from here, and can they actually move forward from here? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure where they can go. I'm not sure that they can actually get a coalition strong enough. What is the most interesting is that Donald Trump has signaled that he wants to work with Democrats, and that he really wants to work with Democrats. It's almost a non-starter in terms of actually getting something done, but I think it's great for political science observations. What does this do? What does this do to the political conversation in the United States for a sitting Republican president to signal that he wants to work with Democrats on a healthcare issue because he couldn't get done what he wanted to get done with Republicans? Now, add on top of that the continued push that you see every year, and a renewed push for a single payer that's coming out of the Democratic ranks, including some congressmen, including Senator Bernie Sanders. This is a conversation that actually will get pushback from rank and file Democrats because of who their donors are. However, we have video and a lot of evidence of Donald Trump saying that he would support a single payer program. I don't think Donald Trump really cares what type of program it is. He just wants to get a win. He won't get a win with single payer with the Democrats because he doesn't have enough votes. But it would serve wonders to expose the Democratic Party's affinity towards corporatized healthcare. It would do wonders to really place a wedge between actual progressives, the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party. I mean, this would be the best possible move for Donald Trump in terms of really creating almost like a coalition government. You know, he will pull from, he would really pull from the Democratic Party people who would be loyal to him on a single payer healthcare plan. And then he would create brand new enemies in his own party because they would not align with him on it whatsoever. I would be surprised if he could even get 10% of the Republican coalition in Congress to support him on single payer. I don't think he could get 5%. But it would be great for us and for us to discuss. All right. Let's take this caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hello, Ben. My name is Scott. I called a couple of weeks ago from Albany. I really think Trump is going to try to destroy the Affordable Care Act again. I really think he's going to do something like that.
What plan, though? What plan do you think he would use to try to destroy it?
he's going to try to get the Republicans to do it again. I really think that.
I don't know that. I think he's passionate about destroying Obamacare because of Obama. I agree with you there. But I don't know if he could actually stomach another failure. So that's why it's really important to say, what would he use? I don't think he would just go at it again without a plan that he feels can win, or a plan that that it's worth losing on. Like, single payer would not pass in this Congress. But it's an argument that would realign the parties in a significant fashion, and it may be worthwhile losing on. So to really discuss what you're proposing there, we really would have to know what plan would he use, because he couldn't go with anything more conservative because they can't really find anything more conservative. And so that begs the question, what plan would he use? Would he go with single payer? But I agree with you that he's very passionate about destroying Obamacare, not because he thinks it's a bad policy. I think he doesn't really even know whether it's a good or bad policy. He probably has no idea what's in it. He just hates President Obama so much that he would do anything to undermine what legacy he has. So thanks for the call, man. 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. Let's keep trucking. Back to international news. So there's a great article from The Intercept by Glenn Greenwald that discusses the increase, the skyrocketing number of civilian casualties underneath the Trump administration. I'm going to pull up the first graphic on your screen. You can see, actually switch to the other graphic for me. This particular graphic, this comes from the article in The Intercept. Be sure to go over there and check it out. You can see in January, February, March, you see a dramatic increase in the number of alleged civilian deaths. You can see the color coordination, color code at the bottom that shows you that the green line, they are contested. And then, of course, the ones that are confirmed are brown. However, there are a significant increase. Now, a big thing to note, October, November, there was an uptick underneath President Obama. So there was an uptick underneath President Obama at the end of his term in terms of civilian casualties. But now we see it skyrocketing. This is important for a couple of reasons. Observations that I made, but also that you can find in this article. Donald Trump made it clear that he wanted to bomb the hell out of quote unquote ISIS. He's carrying out his promises, right? He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. There's also conversations about the change in the rules of operation, right? Of the manner in which they are allowed to engage, rules of engagement, rather, the manner in which they're allowed to engage, and the strenuous nature, the strenuous restrictions that are placed on our military to avoid civilian casualties. There's been conversations from the Trump administration about loosening those restrictions so that they are more free to carry out their bombing campaigns indiscriminately. And we see the results of this so far. Another part of the article that I think was great is because it really dissects this ideology that Donald Trump seems to have convinced Americans with, that he's a non-interventionist. And they mistake, according to Greenwald, they mistake non-interventionism as pacifism. But it's a very specific style of non-interventionism that is as hawkish as almost any other ideology, particularly because any perceived threat, any desire to spread or fight back, rather, against an ideology that they feel is a threat, they take off the gloves and they go in the most barbaric fashion. Political commentators, particularly some on the left, have misconstrued this non-interventionism promise as pacifism, and they've convinced themselves that Donald Trump is somehow going to be different on the international stage. Yes, he has become different than President Obama in the sense that he is killing a lot more people, a lot more civilians. There are some discussions, debate about the root cause of the increase in the casualties, particularly this battle for Mosul. They're in the side of the city now. They're in the portion of the city that is still held, obviously held by ISIS, but the civilian population is much higher. In fact, the bombing that this article is about, the bombing took place March 17th. 100 of the 101 people who have been confirmed killed were pulled out of a single building. In fact, the second graphic that we'll pull up on your screen shows you that even in the midst of a decrease in the number of airstrikes in the region, you have an increase in the number of civilian casualties. You can bring that up on your screen now. So you can see as of March, you have a decrease in the number of strikes on the far right end of this graph. In Iraq and Syria, a dramatic decrease in the number of airstrikes, but yet and still we see a dramatic increase in the number of alleged civilian deaths. So what is that? How do you interpret that? You interpret that as to say we're doing fewer strikes, but those strikes, if we are underneath this new Trump doctrine, if you want to call it that, the restrictions that are placed and the level of scrutiny that's placed on the decision to make an airstrike and the calculation of the number of civilian deaths that are possible have been loosened. And so even though we may have fewer strikes as of right now, we certainly have an uptick in the number of civilians that have been killed. The major takeaway from this is if we are opposed to interventionism in general, if we're opposed to collateral damage, civilian deaths, if we're opposed to any of these things that we complained about underneath, and we protested and we talked about underneath President Obama, we are entering into a phase where Donald Trump, who made it clear that he wanted to be far more barbaric than President Obama, he is actually carrying out that policy. And so we 100% have to be just as vocal and loud against Donald Trump's barbaric reign, which we can't even really, it is a continuation of American policy, but it is clearly an escalation. And so we have to address it as such. All right. We got a lot of stories to cover. We'll if there are callers, please hold on. We'll talk to you in a minute because we have so many more things that we have to talk about. I want to go to the stories, multiple stories coming from DC, Washington, DC. There are a lot of, there's a surprising number of abductions and missing people that occur in the United States in general. In DC, they have an average of about 2,000 people who disappear annually. And last week they had a town hall. Discussing the increase in the number of women and children, girls who have disappeared, and to listen to the language and the tone of the police, the leadership there, so calm and so casual about the number of people who disappear. I start with that because I think that might be the problem, right? The problem is that in so many ways, this has become, the number of missing people has become baked into our system, and we're not alarmed by it. And oftentimes it's not even communicated to the general public. Now, according to the data, the vast majority of people who disappear, they're solved, they're found within a 24-hour period. They're recovered. One interesting point, though, that is very disturbing that I pull from Sean King in the New York Daily News is that out of the 95%, out of the 100% of cases that are solved, and people who are 95% of the people are recovered. And DC police speak about this and they promote this and they boast about this because that is great, right? 95% of the people who go missing are recovered. But underneath the data is disturbing. The 5% that are not recovered, they are either Black or Latina. I mean, really think about that in terms of the percentage of people in the city that are Black, and percentage of people who in the city who are Latin or Latina. So a couple of names that jump out: Shania Boyd, Sharia Payne. These are just two young Black girls who disappeared and have not been recovered. I'm trying to tread delicately with this because it is both disturbing, but there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. There are a lot of celebrities who mean well, who are trying to do their best to bring awareness to this issue, and they've been sharing information that's not accurate. So I'm trying to be sure not to share or to inflame this anymore. But the problem for me is that too many people are calm about it. So it's kind of like I exist in between wanting to fan the flames to make sure that we find these people, but we also have to be careful to share the right information. Here's some of the things that that need to be pointed out. According to the BBC, there has been an increase. I want you to think about these numbers. An increase from an average of 190 girls who go missing on a monthly basis to 200 that go missing on a monthly basis. Granted, 95% are recovered, solved. But of the 5% that are left, they're Black and they're Latina. Part of this equation is the fact that we are now being exposed to what the DC police feel is just a regular day. And I use that language because in no world that I want to exist in are we comfortable having a regular day or a regular month where 200 people go missing, or a regular year where over 2,000 people go missing. However, this is a regular day for DC. And in their efforts to expose more people to this reality, what they've done is they utilize social media to bring awareness to the issue. All right. By bringing awareness to the issue, it's like we're just getting awakened to it. This has been an ongoing problem. And the thing that jumps out the most to me about this is that if this problem has been going on this long, how do we not have all hands on deck to find our missing girls? D.L. Hughley, the comedian, the radio host, he put it best. We got the FBI to track down 2 jerseys for Tom Brady. They went all the way to Mexico to find jerseys for Tom Brady. But we barely get Amber Alerts for the missing girls in DC. Now, this is a problem across the country, but it seems to be localized and exacerbated in DC. And yet we have FBI agents who could track down a jersey in Mexico. But not only are we not finding this last 5%, we're cavalier and we're comfortable enough to speak as though we're doing the best that we can. That language in itself is so problematic. It's so disturbing because these are real individuals. These are people. These are people whose lives. And you know, there's a lot of advice that's being given to families when this happens. They want to make sure that people don't report the girls as being runaways, don't report the girls as being involved in any type of illicit activities, because if they're considered to be runaways or they're considered to be involved in any type of illicit activities, the police are that much more casual and relaxed in the pursuit. Another dynamic of this. This is a dynamic that Soledad O'Brien, I think she's still of CNN, but formerly of CNN, if nothing else, she brought up that I think is definitely worth mentioning. There is an obsession in the United States with young, quote unquote, attractive white girls who disappear. And yes, this has a racial component because of the people who are not recovered. They're Black, they're majority Black and Latina. But we have an obsession with white, you know, think about JonBenet Ramsey. Think about all the names that we know off the top of our head of white children who disappear. And I mean, like a dragnet, even if we don't find them, we put so much attention and focus on their stories that people at least know about the tragedy. And yet here we are, Washington, D.C., over 2,000 missing every single year. And we're just now getting to a point where we have national coverage about it. Here's the last thing I'm going to say about it, because eventually we'll probably start doing profiles of the individual people missing. But this is something that I have to say because it's I'll say it and then you'll understand. Do not conflate the conspiratorial political agenda of Pizzagate with this. And I'm asking as politely as I can, because here's the reality. Pizzagate is insanity. If you believe it and you're mad at me for saying that, you feel free to unsubscribe, leave, do whatever you got to do. Pizzagate is so ridiculous that Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist in chief, had to apologize and is facing a lawsuit because of it. Right? But more importantly than whether or not you believe it's real or whatever, it's fake, but that's not the point. The reason I'm bringing it up in context of the missing girls in DC is because the people who are promulgating Pizzagate have zero concern about these girls, because these girls have been missing for years. And Pizzagate is a political agenda for people who hate the Clintons, hate Podesta. They have a grudge. They don't like, they hold on to this. They're taking it and they have this world that they've created around Pizzagate. And it has nothing to do with the girls that are missing. It has everything to do with people who feel like they can bring down Clinton and bring down John Podesta, and nothing to do with the reality of 200 girls every single month that go missing. And it takes away from the real cases of sex trafficking, human sex slavery, human trafficking. This happens on an ongoing basis. And if your interest in these terrible crimes, just imagine a friend, a child, someone, a loved one, someone you know being kidnapped and enslaved into a sex slave life. If your interest in that is the extent to which you can pin it on John Podesta and Hillary Clinton, go to hell. Because you're not genuinely concerned about the people who have been hurt, the families that have been broken, the lives that will never be recovered. You're interested in the political agenda. I know I have at least 3 more minutes of ranting about this in me, but I can't do it without devolving into just cussing. So I will say again, if you're genuinely concerned about these missing people, do not allow people in your space to conflate and mix this conspiracy theory so ridiculous that Alex Jones himself has had to apologize for it. Do not conflate that with the real horrific situation that is happening across the country, but particularly in DC, where all these girls are missing. Because the people, again, I can't even go back into it because it blows me away. I'm seeing it more and more and more, and I'm going to call it out every time I see it. Let's change the subject. Let's change the subject. All right. Let's. What else do we have? Okay. Let me come back up for air. Should I play this song from America and Going Home? Had a bad day. Good idea, David. Let's talk about the bad week that right-wing media has had. And I'm going to start with Alex Jones again. Alex Jones, who, as I mentioned in the last segment, is the conspiracy theorist in chief. He is one of the #1 promulgators of the Pizzagate narrative. Pizzagate is about this pizza parlor in DC that is apparently you can call up and order a particular type of pizza and you can get a child prostitute, slave, sex slave. This is and as a result, they found a code inside of John Podesta. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Kiss my ass. It's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that Alex Jones, the man you see in this picture behind me, has had to apologize. A full-throated, very coherent, well-written legalese apology about promoting this story for which he had no tangible evidence. it's such a full-throated apology that you almost believe that underneath this idiotic, barbaric Neanderthal of a man, of a human, of a Neanderthal, you almost believe that he actually has a human side to him. But it's so funny because now he's placed in a position where he's actually going to have to pay the piper with all of his followers who really believe that Pizzagate is a real thing. Now they're even floating the idea that Alex Jones is himself a false flag operation by the CIA. The CIA has put Alex Jones there to make the Pizzagate people look more idiotic than they already look. That's the first example of the kind of week that conservative media had. The second example is Tammy Larengia. In the picture, and I got to give a shout out to the guy. There's a tweet. Actually, there's a tweet in there. If you could pull up the image of the tweet, because I want to give credit to the image, the person who did this. He did this online. It is a picture from Martin. And anyone who grew up, here it is. His name is, wrong side. At Fabe Wade. Go find the tweet, retweet it, Fabe Wade on Twitter. You ain't got no damn job, Tommy. If you know Martin, you know the joke. If you don't, I don't know how to help you. But Tammy Larengia, Tommy Lawfren, she has been fired permanently from The Blaze. She has been fired because of what we discussed last week. She was on The View and she talked about her pro-choice values. As a result of speaking on her pro-choice values, she has become the ire of the conservative movement. And almost as quickly as she ascended, actually not even faster than she ascended, she has fallen and now she has been fired. And all I can say is good on her for being fired because nobody wanted to hear her ridiculous arguments. Well, I can't really say much more without going into a sexist kind of trope, so I'll leave it there. But Tammy Lauren has been fired. It's a great week. 2 for 2 conservative propagandists and shills have had a horrible week. This next clip, though, is the creme de la creme of right-wing media being put in its place. Here is almost the godfather of journalism, Ted Koppel, telling Sean Hannity that he is bad for America.
To the American people that they're somewhat intelligent and that they know the difference between an opinion show and a news show.
Yeah.
You're cynical. Look at that. Yeah.
I am cynical because,
You think we're bad for America? You think I'm bad for America?
Yeah.
You do?
In the long haul, I think you and all these opinion shows...
That's sad, Ted.
No, you know why?
That's sad.
Because you're very good at what you do and because you have attracted a significantly more influential...
Watch this.
Let me finish the sentence before you do that.
With all due respect.
You have attracted people who are determined that ideology is
more important than the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have anything else to say about that, but when you run up against Ted Koppel and with a straight face, he tells you that you are the problem in America. And it's a beautiful segment. It actually covers everyone from Rachel Maddow down to Mike Cervanich or whatever, another right-wing propagandist. And he discusses the reality of commentary from journalists, quote unquote journalists, that have less regard for the facts than they do their audience and making money for a profit. That's all. Good night, folks. I'm out of here.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.